We're here with Jeremy Jenkins from All Things, All People. Jeremy, thanks for being with us on the Vast podcast today.
Gentlemen, it's an honor. I'm super excited.
So good to have you.
Yeah. By the way, if you hear something in the background, I don't know, someone's hammering something next door.
So it's a sledgehammer, I think.
You know. So, okay, man, it's good to have you with us. In fact, I know I first came across you. I think you had Nathan Finocchio on the show. Nathan is a friend of the pod, irreverent friend of the podcast. And so I think I started following you then. And then it's maybe been a couple of months ago, you posted something about doing some research into transhumanism and the metaverse. So before we jump into kind of all things, why don't you just give us like a explanation of like what you do, what got you into doing what you're doing, and help us get caught up.
Yeah, man. So I've been in ministry for like 11 years. I got out of college and went straight into pastoring. And I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois, which is right outside Chicago, and then ended up in the South. I'm in North Carolina right now, Western North Carolina. And got into pastoring, sort of like, the typical like student pastor start out, and then, you're waiting for greener pastures somewhere else. And it turned out that, God had already brought me to the greener pastures. So I'm actually still at the church that I started at 11 years ago. And the way All Things, All People really started was in the midst of that pastoring. I came across, I was, bivocational for a time, and I was working as a teacher or working in a school. Actually, I was a tech guy in a school, and I had this kid who was an assistant of mine who was Indian, and he and I hit it off, became buddies, and I really wanted to share the gospel with him, but his family was devout Hindus, and I realized I had a Bible degree. And even my degree says it's, a bachelor's of science in religion, but I had no idea what Hindus believed. And nor did I really know much of what anybody believed outside of evangelicals. And so really became fascinated, not just with Hinduism, but really the question of like, so we have 7.3 billion people on planet Earth. And Christians make up, depending on who you ask, depending on which groups of Christians you're including, we make up about 2 billion of those. If you exclude Catholics and Orthodox, we have about 750 million Protestants. If you exclude mainlines, which more and more it's becoming sometimes where you have to, you end up with, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of what we would consider evangelicals. And so what that came down to is that I think it's a crime that most Christians in the West, at least, can't tell you what anybody believes other than them. And I'm firmly convinced that you really don't know what you believe unless you've at least come face to face with what other people believe too. And so I started All Things, All People, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. It's sort of morphed into what it is now, which is sort of like a multimedia ministry now. But the mission statement is that we exist to explore the darkest places and worldviews for the gospel, and to equip Christians to engage them with the gospel. And I just really, truly believe that a life of following Jesus is a life of following Jesus into the dark. We see that the apostles did that. They went into the places where lepers were. They went to where the destitute and the impoverished were, but they even went to where the demonic oppressed were in the Gerasenes. And this guy, this Jesus, wherever no one else was willing to go, that's where he would go. And so part of what we do with All Things, All People, it's not the entirety of it, because it's quite a bit of teaching. And as I mentioned to you guys pre-show, I do teach in a college, world religions. Selfishly, what I tell my friends is my selfish goal in life is to be the Christian Indiana Jones, like teach and, do the boring thing on this side of things, but then, go into these wild places in people groups, but only for the sake, it's not just to have a sick Instagram. It's to be able to come back and teach Christians like, hey, I can read a book and tell you what Latter-day Saints believe or what Hindus believe, but I can tell you about my friends who are Hindus too. I can tell you about the smells of a Hindu temple. I can tell you what the light reflecting off the marble floor in a Church of Scientology looks like when they're telling you about these crazy things that they believe in. So, so that's kind of what we do. So, you mentioned, we do podcasting. We're kind of trying to break into the video world now, which is brand new to me. Last night I was at Clemson University speaking and doing question and answer with the students there. And so we do a lot of things, but it's just, get out there and see what the rest of the world believes, and then come back and tell the Christians, hey, you don't have to be scared of these people. And in fact, we can be light in those dark places. And so that's what we do.
Bro, I freaking love that.
That's awesome.
That is incredible.
Yeah. When you we used the term again before, embed yourself into these different people groups. Is that really what you're doing? I mean, are you going there as a seeker in a sense, or are you going telling them, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm. So
I'll give away some house secrets here. So I never lie. And in all honesty, so I studied in my master's degree was called intercultural studies, which is an evangelical way of saying anthropology. So a true anthropologist would embed themselves probably for weeks, months, years with a people group they're trying to learn. Obviously, we don't have that luxury. Typically, what it looks like is that I go into situations either by myself or with some of the team that I work with, all of whom happen to be friends of mine. And usually what we do, honestly, is we just kind of walk into things naturally. Most of these situations are not things that we need to be secretive about. These are usually places that are open to the public. A witchcraft store in Asheville, North Carolina. When we walk in there, we don't volunteer any information. We let them qualify us. But at the end of the day, I'm going to share with them that I'm a Christian. I'm going to share with them. I might not say that I'm a pastor. Usually my favorite go-to is that I'm a professor, and people will trust professors endlessly, weirdly enough. And so if you tell somebody you're a professor and you teach world religions, all of a sudden, you get a little bit more credit than you would if you said you were a pastor. But no, we don't present ourselves falsely. A lot of times, when we were in Salt Lake City and Provo, we had a camera with us most of the time. And so what a good way to give yourself away. When you have a camera, people ask a lot of questions then, but no, so we don't falsely present ourselves, but we also will tell the narrative that will help us embed ourselves most effectively. You guys know how it is, probably even more so in Los Angeles. If you start with, hey, I'm a pastor, nobody's talking to you. But if you say, hey, I want to learn more about what you believe. What does this mean? What is that, idol over there? What is that? Everybody's favorite topic is themselves. And so we found that even with the camera, or even with hey, we're Christians. If we express a genuine interest in somebody, they're willing to cut through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've done Wicca, is that right?
Yeah.
Scientology, Hinduism, Mormonism, and maybe a few others. So maybe it would be cool just to jump in and let's take a few of these, one by one, and talk about what it is that they believe. And I guess we'll just go from there.
Yeah.
But before we do that, can we talk about should we talk about transhumanism?
Yeah, I want to hear. Yeah.
Well, I don't even know what that is, other than I think it's just using science and technology to go beyond the human race as we know it. Yeah.
When I hear transhumanism, I just think of, I literally go back to that Joe Rogan episode with Alex Jones, where he goes on a whole rant about transhumanism. Yeah. I know that's not that's not,
I like that you guys are well versed in Joe Rogan. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I am. Jake thinks he's problematic in many different areas, but I'm kidding.
Well, he is, but that's okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he's not fun to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah. So transhumanism, at the beginning of the year, we ended up not being able to produce much content on it. But we're going to, Jake, you say you don't know what it is. That's understandable. And actually there's a wide array of what people would say transhumanism is. Essentially, when it comes down to it, transhumanism really has been around for quite a while, at least philosophically. I think the technology is really just getting to the point where now it could even be a reality. But it's the idea that there may or may not be one day like a humanity 2.0 that in some form or fashion is enhanced or further enabled by technology. And so that takes many forms. Honestly, like, the biomedical field has been toying around with this for quite a while, and in some ways quite admirably, things that, if you think about even some of the medical advancements that we've had in the last 20 or 30 years, the ability to, use synthetic materials in, organ surgeries, things like that. Mm-hmm. But really, when people talk about transhumanism, they're talking about more some like Elon Musk type stuff. Where
that's what I was going to ask. Is it like Neuralink? Yeah,
Neuralink. And honestly, so there's a huge field of philosophy that has been around for quite a while, where people have essentially been theorizing what this would look like one day. And it's beginning to take shape now practically in things like Neuralink, in things like the metaverse. And so we did some stuff with the metaverse at the beginning of the year, where myself and my team and it's somewhat trivial because really when nobody really knows exactly what the metaverse is going to be, but like the idea of spending extended periods of time in virtual reality in spaces that are there to replace your office, there to replace a movie theater, there to replace concerts, things like that. This is one small part of transhumanism. Now, a purist within the transhumanism field would say that this is kind of like a joke, but I firmly believe, and actually, I never thought I would quote somebody like Logan Paul, but whenever we were doing research, we came across this video of Logan Paul, of all people, talking about how he thinks that one day the headsets are actually going to be something that we hold very tightly to our own identity. And he even uses the words, I think it's going to get to the point where it's going to be painful to take it off. And so I think no matter kind of what direction somebody is forecasting the transhumanism push, is I think what we're seeing now is that what it means to be human is up for debate. And through my research, I really struggled ascertaining where we're going to be in 20 or 30 years with the idea of you guys know, right now, identity politics is front and center. Mm-hmm. The fact that right now, in a world where I can't change very much about the way I look, I can change how I identify. Well, what does it mean in 20 or 30 years when I can change my avatar? I can change how you see me and perceive me like that to match an identity that I've constructed for myself. And so I think that the metaverse and transhumanism in general is actually going to play a much bigger role in the West, at least in a higher socioeconomic population, because that's the other thing. A lower socioeconomic population is not concerned with transhumanism. Right. But I think it's on the forefront of having to be, any minister of the gospel is going to have to be familiar with this, because 30 years ago, I'm 33, so let's just say even 10 years ago, if you had told me we would be where we're at with transgenderism, I would have laughed at you. Right. And so I think in 20 or 30 years, we'll be saying the same thing about things like the metaverse. I might sound like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but I kind of think I'm onto it. And a lot of people are.
I guess like transgenderism, when it comes to the surgeries that they're, trying to push the envelope on now, that is kind of like transhumanism in seed form. Like we are taking the human body. Yeah, philosophically, we're taking the human body beyond its designed limitations and making it some kind of 2.0 out of it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think every Christian should really wrestle with the question of, what is your identity? And how much of you could ever possibly be changed or deviated from. And we're, like you said, seed form. I think we're seeing the symptoms of this in the transgender movement. And, I understand those people are genuinely hurting, and they're genuinely struggling, and I don't want to take that away from them. But I think whether it's transgenderism, transhumanism, the answer is not change the most integral parts of you. And that's kind of where I've come to with that.
So I guess that kind of opens up a conversation about like, what are some of the ethical things that you see from a Christian perspective with the transhumanism movement? Like if that gets to, you know, a pretty elaborate place, how should Christians think about that?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky question because we never want to be opposed to genuine advancements, you know. So I don't know if you guys like have an Oculus headset or have ever messed with them. They're awesome. They're super fun. Like, and so I want to get ahead and say like there are certain aspects of this, of virtual reality and the metaverse and transhumanism, which transhumanism is a much bigger conversation than just the metaverse, and say, you know, we do have to be discerning to what are genuine scientific advancements that are actually going to better humanity, and what are things kind of like Adam and Eve in the garden, or you know, Lucifer in heaven. What are things that are us trying in some form or fashion to take the form of God? And I think the ethical things that Christians need to begin wrestling with now, long before their kid ever asks for an Oculus headset or whatever the iteration of it is going to be in time to come, is what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be me? And, you know, and if I or my child or my spouse or a friend, or in the case of, you know, guys like us who are in ministry, you know, people that I'm shepherding and leading, if they're struggling with some form of identity crisis, how am I going to lead them through that? Because it's very easy, and it's becoming easier, to change the thing about you that you don't like into some other thing, as opposed to being reconciled, as opposed to maybe even repenting of something, as opposed to, you know, letting the light shine in your life in an area that you're just trying to hide or cover up. And so I know I'm using blanket statements here, but, you know, we'll see where the technology goes. And I'm not an engineer. I'm certainly, you know, my grades in science were embarrassing at best. But what I'm seeing more than anything is that theologically, the church, I don't think, is prepared for the questions that are going to come up, even in the pews, even in the churches, of just like, you know, hey, my son, you know, my son's heterosexual. He identifies as straight. He identifies as a man, but when he's in the metaverse, he acts like a girl. You know, it's like we don't have a subset. We don't have a panel to put that information in yet, but we will. And and what typically happens, as we're seeing with like the LGBTQ movement, is that culture beats us there. Culture determines how we're going to talk about those things. And then the church catches up and uses the language that is being loaned to us by the culture that we're trying to disagree with. And so I just think that Christians ethically, like Jake, like you asked, like, need to begin asking those deep questions, like what is a human, and what makes us human, and where are the boundaries there, you know? And so yeah, I just think even familiarizing that people, you know, with the idea of like, hey, there's going to be some big changes societally. Like if you follow Elon Musk on Twitter or wherever else, you know, which is going to become a lot easier in these next few days, I think. But every time that guy opens his mouth, there's some new crazy idea that he has that potentially could change, you know, humanity's existence here on planet Earth. So I just think Christians need to pay more attention first and foremost to what's happening.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
okay.
Fascinating.
Well, I think that could be a whole episode on it. So,
I know,
but maybe we'll leave it there for now. Yeah. Mike, is there anywhere you want to start?
No, I mean, it's all fascinating to me.
Okay.
So I'm literally trying to gauge time going, I don't want to run out.
Yeah.
So what do we do first?
Yeah. I would say let's start with Wicca, New Age.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. Cause I feel like that's pretty pertinent to our context here in LA.
Yeah.
And so give us the rundown on.
Yeah. You guys see that a lot. You guys see that a lot in Los Angeles, I suppose.
I feel like we do. But I guess I need you to start talking about it, and maybe that'll help kind of like connect.
Maybe more indirectly, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I have this theory that, you know, when I was in school, all I ever heard about was atheism. Mm-hmm. And, you know, guys like Dawkins and Hitchens and Sam Harris and whoever else, you know, these guys were the ones that, like, when I was in my theology classes, were like, we were like, how do we answer the new atheists? Mm-hmm. And then I got out of college and I started doing ministry and like searched up and down, couldn't find a freaking atheist anywhere, you know, because genuinely, I think culturally we're moving towards what I call spiritual agnosticism, which is this idea that we're seeing a mass exodus out of the church in Western culture, specifically from like millennials on down to Gen Z. And I don't think they're becoming atheists. I think that they have this void of spirituality. They believe in ghosts. Actually, I think Pew Research or Lifeway did this survey that says, like, most people believe in ghosts. Most people believe in some form of an afterlife. Most people believe in some form of like karma, or like you reap what you sow. But they don't. But they're leaving, you know, gospel-centered churches in droves. They're turning more and more to, in some cases, like a soft form of like New Age belief. So like what you'll see in New Age is a lot of crystals, metaphysical things. Like we have, in my tiny little town here in Western North Carolina, we have a shop on our main street where like they sell like incense. And I was in there a couple weeks ago and the girl was telling somebody like, oh, this incense drives away negative energy. You know, you can carry, you know, little, you know, fetishes, which like a fetish is like, you know, a little object that is, you know, blessed or cursed in some fashion. So you have that, like, in very much, it's a gateway into more of the occult, which is hugely identified with Wicca. Wicca is a particular subset of NeoPaganism, and basically coming out of the 19th and 20th centuries, mainly in Western Europe, and even specifically in England, there was this movement, and the person who's typically identified with it is a guy named Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner, I think he was a civil servant, like maybe a postman or something like that. But he became infatuated with the old religion, as he would say, and a lot of people even still today would say, of the pre-Christian naturalistic religions. And so like think like, you know, spirits and natural spirits and spells and witchcraft. And so Gerald Gardner and the community surrounding him were instrumental in bringing back into the mainstream this idea of neopaganism, witchcraft, Wicca. And it's become hugely popular now. And I think largely because, like I said, we have this movement of spiritual agnosticism of people who say, I don't know what I believe, but I still believe that there's something out there. And so witchcraft and things with it can take many forms. The most open forms, which I'm sure you have plenty of in Los Angeles, is, you know, there's people who, you know, you can go into these witchcraft shops. I don't recommend that for everybody, but you can go into these places and buy candles that, you know, will bind the tongue of somebody who's slandering you or causing you harm. You can cast spells, you know, that are going to bring about financial blessing. You know, you guys are probably familiar with like what we typically call like voodoo dolls. In the occult, those are called puppets. And so there's dolls that you can buy and spiritually tie them to somebody else and either use that to harm them or better them. And it's all centered around this idea that as long as I'm, you know, there's this thing called the Wiccan Rede, which is as long as I harm nobody, I can do whatever I want. And so it's playing into the idea that there is this spiritual world that we can't see, and it's run and it's dictated by spirits. Many of them are animistic spirits, natural spirits, goddesses especially. Wicca is very much influenced by feminism and in a feministic mindset, which gives a lot of priority to a divine goddess. Mm-hmm. And so with that, you'll find, I think the Wicca and community surrounding it's predominantly female. And so it's a growing movement right now, and it looks different everywhere. Every coven, a group of witches, will have their own teachings, will have their own, you know, book of shadows is what they would call it, kind of like a spell book. And what's crazy, even as I'm listening to myself say this, is it sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds crazy, but it's not. Like, it's happening, and it's happened. Like I said, I'm in small town North Carolina, and I have it around me. And so, for you guys in Los Angeles and other listeners who are in larger metropolitan areas, it's certainly happening, and it's very attractive to young people right now because.
Why do you think that is?
Man, well, so talking to this woman one time who's a leader in the Wicca community in the Southeast, I kind of asked her that question, and she said, I think it gives people a sense of control over their lives. And I think I agree. I'll say this too. I think the church has done a really bad job in the West, in America, of explaining to Christians that there is a spiritual world. Like, we think of heaven and we think of God high and lifted up on his throne. And then we think of the world that we can see, taste, touch, and smell. And we are never taught holistically about this spiritual realm that is inhabited by angels and demons and, the Holy Spirit and things like that. And I think that lack has actually led some people to look elsewhere for a better understanding of the world that we live in. And so when you combine that with the aspect of control, these are young people who don't like what they deem. I got asked, recently by a college student to justify what they deem to be the genocide at Jericho. They don't like that God could allow such evil. I heard the other day, Ricky Gervais joking about how, God wasn't at the Holocaust, and I think culturally overall, we have a lot of people who don't like the God of their invention, the Judeo-Christian God that they think we're talking about. And so they turn elsewhere, and they turn to faiths, they turn to groups and religions that give them a sense of control. And so I think we're seeing it, like I said, especially in young people. And I think also too, in a progressive movement that views evangelicalism as very conservative and stilted and in the past. And so, yeah, so I think it's a confluence of a lot of different cultural movements, but control probably being the biggest key word there.
Is there a link between Wicca, witchcraft, the occult, with New Age?
So, yes and no. I was talking to this one guy who was a big proponent of like crystals and things like that, who would take great offense to the idea that anything he does is associated with witchcraft. So no, not inherently, but they kind of come from the same school of thought, and it's that neo-pagan school of thought. And what I've seen quite a bit of is that if you ask most people who are active in a Wicca, in a community where they're practicing Wicca and other, occult practices, many of them started with the New Age. And New Age can be anything. I mean, it can be anything that, tarot cards, Ouija boards. I know that it sounds, to a listener who it sounds like I'm kind of like, old
talking
man
about games.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like old man saying everything the kids are doing, but this is real stuff, And so no, there's no direct link, but I think there is a soft one for sure.
Well, back up for a second, right? Because I kind of like the umbrella to these things is neo-paganism. So yes. When we're talking about worldviews have to answer certain questions, things like origins, things like meaning, morality, destination, where are we headed? Can you talk briefly? And I know this might be hard to talk briefly, but could you talk briefly about like how neo-paganism answers questions like those kind of like real big questions?
That's great. Yeah. So I love that, because I think one thing that most people are lacking in trying to do this kind of stuff and have these kinds of conversations is we start with culture. We start with like, so what do they believe? Or what are the spells that they do? The spells actually aren't answering anything. So the worldview, if you break it down, and you did just there for a second, like, cosmology, origins, morality, success in life, those types of things. A lot of this comes down to what somebody in the occult community would say is that this stuff is older than Christianity. And that's what, that's why it's NeoPaganism. Most scholars would say it's not. Most scholars would say that this has nothing to do with any of the pagan beliefs that, pre-existed Christianity in the West, and that it's just a simple recreation by people who are infatuated with that. So with that, what I would say then is it's more tied to a postmodern school of thought, which is ultimately there is no meta narrative. Ultimately, and it's a kind of a warped thing if you were to ask people in that community to explain, so where do you think we came from? What is, our moral compass? Is I think you're going to get a lot of the same typical postmodern answers that, you probably get, from somebody who's not in this community, but has bought into this postmodern mindset, is that ultimately reality is whatever you deem it to be. And so I think that that's pretty rampant in that community. And that's also why from group to group, you'll find, one group practices their brand of Wicca or New Age metaphysical beliefs one way, and another group might practice it completely and utterly different. And I actually asked somebody one time, I was like, it's such a fragmented group, and it really stems back to, Jake, like what you just asked, like with worldview, is ultimately if we got all of you in one room and asked, what are you trying to achieve? Don't you think that many of you would actually be at odds with one another? And the only answer to that is yes, and so I think that we see a very fragmented worldview, and by no means is it monolithic at all. And I would even say most people, and this would probably be true about a lot of Christians too, but most people are not even aware of the worldview implications. They're just trying to, fix the void in their heart or mind. And somebody told them that this particular brand of, New Age, metaphysical, occult thinking will do that.
Yeah. Fascinating. Let's do Hinduism.
Yes.
I'm tempted to do Scientology, but I kind of feel like most people know Scientology is a big joke.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this then about Scientology. It is, and and I
okay, let's move on.
I say that lovingly, you know what I mean? So I'll be honest, like I'm sure you guys have your own versions of this. Like when we do things like when I do stuff on Hinduism, nowhere near as many likes or views as Scientology. And that's kind of sad for me because I'm like, there's literally 1 billion Hindus, right. 1/7 of the world's population. And there's like 5 Scientologists. Now it's dying rapidly.
That's why I'm tempted to do Hinduism, because I feel like people are much more likely to interact with people who have Hindu beliefs.
Yeah. Well, so Hinduism. So
quickly, can I just ask one question on the Scientology thing, just because it's more curiosity. So it's dying. Has that sort of been a result of, I guess, all of the like really negative press that's come out like in the last several years? And then also, my question is like, what is it? I mean, don't they like part of what? At least it seems like Scientology, that sort of the power, the foothold that they still have is just in like the property that they own and in sort of the financial network that they have built. So although less and less people are Scientologists, you almost wonder like what the next steps are for them.
Yeah.
But
I've thought the exact same thing because they are losing people in droves, and you guys hit on it. The bad press has to be the biggest issue. I mean, people will fall for lies all the time. People will fall for, screwy cults all the time, and Scientologists actually have done a better job than most cults in presenting themselves. If you go into a church of Scientology, if you go down the street to the celebrity center, it's going to be super clean in there and the people are going to be super nice. They're not going to be what you think Scientologists are like at all. But ultimately the bad press has crushed them, and they're trying to address that now. Actually, if you notice, you don't hear much about Scientology right now. Like they're keeping their celebrities, more hidden, and really they're focusing on quite a bit of humanitarian efforts right now. And so I think we won't see them go away anytime soon. And like you said,
interesting.
These guys are like real estate tycoons. They own tons and tons of property all over the world, and they're leveraging that. And so they have more money. They have more money than like I probably most religious organizations, they have more money than. So I think it's going to be a long time till they disappear off the radar, if ever.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So let's start with Hinduism. Let's start with those bigger questions. Like where do we come from?
Yeah.
How is meaning and morality found, and where's this whole shtick going?
So I, the professor in me will have to start with this. So Hinduism is itself a misnomer in the sense that when the British took over India, there's this river in northwest India. It's actually what mostly in Pakistan now, because Pakistan used to be in India, and it's the Indus River. And when people started coming into India and trying to explain who these people were and what their religions were, they called them Hindus or Hindus. And so basically Hinduism as we know it, the billions of Hindus, is actually a combination of thousands and thousands of the religions of the Indian subcontinent, which I've been there quite a few times, and I had a friend explain it to me one time that every 30 kilometers, something about the religion changes, just like something about the food and the language changes. And so you can't talk about Hindus generically at all. You will always be wrong about some group. If you say if somebody ever says all Hindus believe in blank, they're wrong. But we can approach those worldview questions, from a bigger subset with that qualifier that, somebody's going to say, no, you're wrong about that. But the biggest things that you have to understand with Hinduism, and so this, you guys have millions of Hindus in Los Angeles. But even in places like where I live, I tell people all the time, it sounds like a cliche, but most of the convenience stores and gas stations in small towns like mine are run by Pakistanis and Indians who mostly are Hindu, or if they're Pakistani, they're usually Muslim. But so they're all around you. But most of them believe in karma. And so we begin to get to some of those worldview questions of morality. Karma is the cosmic force that dictates that if what you do in this life will come back to you in this life or in lives to come. And so karma is an impersonal force that dictates your morality. And so if you are doing good works, if you're being a good person, then that will come back to you. And I mentioned in lives to come because most people realize that Hindus believe in the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation, which is called samsara. And so those two things largely dictate the way anyone who identifies as a Hindu lives their lives. And most people, we can make it fancy and we can make it about temple worship and idols and yoga and things like that. But at the end of the day, most of your run-of-the-mill Hindus are concerned with just being good people. And the question of, what is a good person?
Right. That's where I was going.
Yeah, they're not as concerned with a systematic explanation of that like we are. They wouldn't, if you guys are familiar with somebody like an apologist like Frank Turek, the moral argument's not going to work on a Hindu typically because morality is fluid to a certain degree. So they would probably agree with quite a bit of cultural relativism, which whatever is good in your situation, that's what you should do. And so, a Hindu is more concerned with just being a good person, whatever that means for you. And so they're certainly not postmodern because they were this way long before postmodernism was ever a thing. But in the East, and you'll find this in schools of thought of Buddhism and East Asian thought, Confucianism, Taoism, Shintoism in China and Japan, that they are not as concerned worldview-wise with a hard morality like we are, that there is a clear right and wrong. I think many of them would say right and wrong is going to change from situation to situation. The issue being be doing the right. And so actually, interestingly enough, I explained to some college students last night at Clemson University, some of my friends who are Hindus have explained to me one of the perils of karma is that obviously, they're to do good works and they're to be good people. But if their motivation of doing good works is then to receive good karma, then in turn, they're being selfish and thereby might actually be the recipient of establishing bad karma. And so it's a vicious cycle, and it's very hopeless in all honesty. There's another ideal in Hinduism. The four that you'll hear is samsara, which is rebirth and reincarnation, and then karma, then dharma. Dharma is essentially just the word for like religion. It's the way. So it's like the particular school of thought that you fall into, or what does your particular religious practice look like? But then the fourth big teaching within Hinduism that people should be familiar with is this concept of moksha. And if you're familiar with, like, within Buddhism, the idea of nirvana, it's similar. And moksha for most Hindus means the release from the cycle of reincarnation. And that only happens after many, many, many lifetimes of establishing good karma and likely going up the caste system. And if you asked most Hindus what they thought of moksha, if they think of it at all, they do not think that they will ever reach it or anytime soon. And so most Hindus that I know don't think about, afterlife very much. They don't think about morality very much. They're literally just trying to get through the day, being good people, and hoping that one day in the many, many lives to come, they might receive the release from that cycle.
And is that release, is that like an immaterial arrival? Like you're now just purely spirit?
So it depends which school of thought in Hindu. So if you're monistic Hindu, so monism is the idea. So like most people would call Hindus polytheists, which they certainly are. But many Hindus actually believe in an all-powerful, supreme, but completely transcendent and unknowable God called Brahman. Okay. And within that school of thought, they would believe that moksha is becoming unified with Brahman. And really, so in a sense, it's almost ceasing to exist. But like the spiritual, ethereal part of you would continue on in oneness with Brahman. There's particular schools of thought of Hinduism, where, you'll go to a type of, afterlife or something like that, reminiscent somewhat of like a Christian idea of heaven, or like Islamic paradise. But predominantly it's the idea of being unified with Brahman. Buddhists, and of course, Buddhism came out of Hinduism. And so there's a lot of intermingling even to this day. And Westerners, like Americans, love Buddhism. Like I would say we are hugely influenced by Buddhism in the West, especially in a New Age school of thought. In Buddhism, nirvana is the ceasing to exist. It's the extinguishing of self. And so I think we're starting to see that impact a Western way of thought more and more.
Are there kind of like some like bastardizations of Christianity going on in that regard, like where it's like becoming one with Christ?
Yeah.
Is that, I don't want to be off base here, but is that kind of like a Richard Rohrian direction type?
So I don't know enough about Richard Rohr to say what he says. I've seen a lot of Richard Rohr hate recently. I do know that he's a mystic. So I will say, first and foremost, there are a lot of people, whether it's Richard Rohr or not, who are really getting dangerously close to preaching what they call spiritual disciplines, which to me sounds a lot like Buddhism. The idea of detaching from your desires, the idea of detaching from yourself. I mean, this is the Buddha himself saying this, and so, I mean, I'm not a hater. If you want to stretch the way that somebody who does yoga stretches, that's one thing. Go stretch. Like I told you guys before I got on, I was golfing. Do whatever you want to do, but the reality is that what we're seeing more and more in the West is that things like yoga, things like transcendental meditation, things like what you just said, the becoming one with Christ. When the Bible talks about that, it's not literal. Like it's not like a unification of spirit. It's not monistic. It's not that all of these things. I mean, in Christian mysticism, we're becoming dangerously close to becoming pantheists.
Right.
Is that the idea that all things have the divine in them?
Right.
And
that's the thing right there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Rohr has said things like that. I am aware of some of that. And so, yeah, no, I think that kind of stuff is dangerous because, the Bible doesn't say that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There is a divide between creation and creator. He's near to it. He knows it. He wants to be known by it, but he is not the creation. And so this whole monistic idea of like, I'm going to extinguish myself and become one with Christ, a lot of it, like you said, bastardization, it's certainly a deviation at best, of the Christian teachings of following Christ. And I don't know if these people are intentionally borrowing from Eastern mysticism, or if they're just being tricked. But it certainly sounds like it.
It's there, yeah. Let me come back to the karma thing really quick, and this is my last question about Hinduism. So you mentioned their essentially moral relativism, although that might be like an overstatement. But there's some kind of fluidity there when it comes to like what's wrong and right. And you mentioned that karma is an impersonal force.
Yeah.
Are those two things linked? Like, help me put that together in my mind, because like, I think we as Christians, we have objective morality because we believe in a personal God who hands us that morality. Yeah. So because they're impersonal karma, are those two things connected?
In the sense that like, so you're saying like it's fluid. Are you saying like, is there a standard that they're looking for or something like that?
Yeah. So like they believe in this Brahmin God, right? But the Brahmin hasn't handed them, like,
so they have teachings. Yeah. So they have scriptures, so like the Vedas and the Puranas, the Bhagavad Gita, they have teachings that do dictate for them some things, but in the finer details, especially in day-to-day life, what's going to dictate it more than anything is what is best for them and for their family, for their community. And so I actually had someone tell me first time I went to India, and I don't know if you guys have ever been, but we've all kind of seen images of India. There's horrible poverty there. And if there's somebody who lives in India or is Indian, please don't be offended by what I'm about to say. This is not a complete indication of all Indians. But as I said, that part of the problem is that there's so many people on the street who need help, beggars, and many Hindus, I should say, don't help them because they look at the situation that they're in this life and say, well, then it must be the karma from your past lives that brought you here. So then, right, we're talking about a moral standard. What's the best thing that you can do for that person? Let them pay for that bad karma. And so you don't see a lot of benevolence in Hindu culture because people who are in bad situations, if you rescue them out of those situations, oftentimes you're robbing them of the opportunity of establishing good karma by paying off the bad karma that brought them there. And so I just use that as one example to say, like, it is very fluid and it's not dictated by a lot of standards. Now, they do, like I said, they do have scriptures, but the way that Hindus view scripture is completely and utterly different than the way, Jews, Christians, Muslims view scripture. It's very much, a guide for life. It's very much like, how did we get here type things, but you won't see a lot of Hindus carrying around the Bhagavad Gita, in their backpack, like you guys probably have your ESVs or something like that, and so yeah, but no, so that very fluid. Yeah. And I think honestly, much of the time it's very much based off of like, what do you think is best? What does your family unit, your community think is best? And we're going to go with that.
Yep.
Fascinating. What do you have coming up next? I know you were just in Salt Lake City. Are there some other, so obviously you've kind of gone deep into Mormonism and what else are you planning?
So we're horribly behind. I have to get on editing all that stuff, and we're gonna be putting out a podcast for the Basecamp series on Latter-day Saints. With that, we're starting what's going to be called ATAP Academy, which will be on YouTube and our website, which is essentially going to be teaching through a wide range of topics, really starting off with a couple worldviews and religions, coincidentally starting off with Latter-day Saints, where we talk about a lot of the questions even you guys have asked, like cosmology, where did we come from? When you go into some of these situations, if somebody's listening to this and they have a Hindu friend or a Scientologist friend or whatever, a great question to ask them is, what's your authority? And that's actually, Jake, like some of the questions you've been asking about Hinduism is kind of that. It's like, well, where do you derive the authority that you're living your life by? So we'll be doing a lot of teaching on that. And then, speaking engagements, things like that. Hopefully, we're coming to an end of a college semester. So hopefully in the fall, I'll have the opportunity to visit some college campuses and talk about this kind of stuff. College kids love talking about this kind of stuff. Many of them grew up in churches where their pastors were afraid to talk about stuff. So now they get to college and they're just like, empty vessels to be filled. And so we try and do some events where we, go to some of these college ministries and give them the opportunity to ask hard questions and all that. So yeah, I'm probably missing some things, but we, planning trips, hopefully, on our list is get out to Los Angeles, because you guys are a melting pot. It'd be hard not to get some good footage out in Los Angeles. So yeah, a whole array of things going on.
Cool. Where can people find you online? Instagram, YouTube? Yeah.
So we'll get YouTube up and running here soon. I've been too slow to do that. We have a nice Instagram community at allthings.allpeople, and you can check out allthingsallpeople.org. All the articles that I've written are there, plus information about speaking and things like that. And then if somebody wants to reach out to me individually, they can hit me up, Jeremy at allthingsallpeople.org. And so yeah, Instagram's always good though.
Awesome, amazing, Jeremy. Thank you, man. Thanks for talking with us.
Thanks, brother. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, you guys, I love what you guys do, and thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man. Talk to you soon.